John Steinbeck, famous American author of the 20th century, was born on the 27th of February 1902 in Salinas, California. In addition to having written numerous novels and short stories, which guaranteed him enormous success, as well as the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1962, he was also an important journalist, poet, and screenwriter. At the end of his studies, and after a brief New York interlude that allowed him to work as a journalist for the New York American newspaper, he returned to California, where he wrote his first novel, Cup of Gold, which was published in 1929. However, he became well known after the publication in 1935 of the novel Tortilla Flat, in which he explored themes that have always been very dear to him, such as the relationship between rich landowners and their poor workers, the exploitation of the underprivileged classes, and their desire for emancipation. From that moment on, Steinbeck became very successful, and his rise to fame reached its peak after the publication of two of his undisputed masterpieces, Of Mice and Men and The Grapes of Wrath. John Steinbeck died in New York on the 20th of December 1968, and although his latest novels were not as appreciated as his two best-known works, he still managed to leave a deep mark on American literature and history. Of Mice and Men is set during the economic crisis of 1929 and implicitly recounts this hard period of American history. The protagonists of the novel are George Milton and Lennie Small, the former very cunning and intelligent, but with a tiny body, while the latter, antithetically, an honest big man with extraordinary physical strength, but with the head of a child. Lennie suffers from a mental retardation that doesn't allow him to communicate effectively, to remember things, and to those his strength. In fact, he inadvertently kills small animals, even just stroking them. Lennie and George are nothing more than two seasonal laborers who move from one ranch to another in search of fortune, and who work together as farm laborers were not used to in those years. Together with George, who takes him under his protective wing, Lennie cultivates a dream, to buy a small farm and live by breeding rabbits. When the two men arrive at the new ranch, after having been forced to run away because of some trouble Lennie was responsible for, they try to earn the money they need to make their dreams come true. They are joined by two other workers of the farm, Candy and Crooks, who, just like the two protagonists, are two losers with the dream of redeeming themselves. However, the situation does not last long. Lennie accidentally kills the wife of the rancher, and George, who is desperate, decides to end his friend's life with extreme anguish, so as not to let him end up in Curly's clutches. Out of the beautiful novel by John Steinbeck, whose simplicity and expressive clarity impressed me from the very first pages, two films were made. Of Mice and Men of 1939, directed by Louis Milestone and nominated for 4 Oscars, was included by the National Board of Review of Motion Pictures in the list of the 10 best films of the year in 1940. In 1992, another film with the same title was made, directed by Gary Sinise, who also played the role of George. Although both films are very true to Steinbeck's book, the first one has a more ironic slant, which, in my opinion, the director used to dilute the dramatic tones that characterize John Steinbeck's incisive and simple style of writing, and that contribute to make the images evoked by the author incredibly vivid and moving. The themes masterfully treated by Steinbeck in his novel are by no means unexplored and unknown, but, on the contrary, they remain rather recurrent in the author's own works, as they are the common thread that links all his novels and in American literature in general. These themes are the condition of seasonal workers, the relationship between the rich and the poor, the great internal migrations, racial hatred, but, even more evident and important, that of friendship, loneliness, the American dream, and finally the disillusionment that comes from seeing that dream inevitably shattered. Of Mice and Men, as well as all the other novels by John Steinbeck, who is an undisputed giant of American literature, has an immeasurable literary and educational value, and that is why, in my opinion, it is very important to read this beautiful novel of his, whose simple and extremely evocative prose makes it accessible to readers of all ages, and whose themes, so important and deep, contribute, even today, to raise awareness in our society. I have chosen to talk about this novel and the two beautiful films that have been made out of it for many reasons. The beautiful story of George and Lenny, their selfless friendship, and its dramatic implications introduced me and brought me closer to American literature. It moved me, but above all, it made me get in touch with the reality of the weakest, of the marginalized, of those who have a dream, but whose hope and hard work are not enough for that dream to come true. Lenny and George naively dream of buying a farm. They dream of a little house where they can live without having to respond to the strict will of a master. They dream of being self-sufficient and finally free. They dream of emancipating themselves and rising above the terrible condition that has had them enslaved to someone throughout their life. They dream of being able to make a living out of their own passions and being in each other's company. The American dream, however, despite being very present and rather urgent in the life of the two protagonists of the novel, remains only a great illusion, a vain hope. It is evocative of the loneliness that characterizes the human soul, and how this always yearns for the unattainable. Awaiting George and Lenny, in fact, is only a harsh and brutal reality. What struck me and touched me deeply was a strong contrast between how cruel and ruthless the world George and Lenny live in and the tenderness and goodness of their soul. Disillusionment is embodied by the vulnerable and weak character of Lenny, who walks blindly through the world, a world he perceives differently than the other characters. He is able to create sympathy in the souls of those around him and bring out their best qualities, but he also symbolizes the last insurmountable obstacle to their emancipation. In this beautiful novel, we read not only about broken dreams, but also about the theme of true friendship, which is represented by the bond between George and Lenny and by the understanding offered by Slim, the head of the ranch workers, a charismatic character who speaks in the name of that justice that the reader hopes to see accomplished at the end of the narrative. With all the loneliness, cruelty, loss, and disappointment that life can bring, friendship is the only strong message of hope that this story gives us. Of Mice and Men is a story of strangers, of unloved and misunderstood people, but at the same time a story of friendship, compassion, and empathy. The story of those who want an alternative to the struggle and pain of human existence. The story of a character whose innocent heart is torn out and stomped on by the same people that should have accepted him and made him feel loved. The story of those who decide to share his pain, to make him feel and to feel less lonely. This novel made me think about the importance of guaranteeing and protecting human rights, about how fundamental it is today to give voice, support, and visibility to those who have felt ignored and invisible all their lives, but also and above all, about how precious the possibility of having a dream and the necessary means to make it come true is.